Vegas isn't crazy. There's 6.5-point spread for Texas at Georgia this Saturday in Athens. But there's a couple things, there's some significant unknowns that could have a massive impact on the ultimate swing of this game. So the first thing that I want to do is read a little excerpt here from something that I wrote earlier this afternoon. And then we're going to listen to some audio with video, of course, overlaid. That way we're all on the same page. And then I'm going to try to have this breakdown in 10 minutes or less. Because I believe that it's in everybody's best interest if I keep this as simple and concise as possible. We try to be, it's a difficult dynamic that we try to balance here. But it's a lot of fun at the same time. The sports below the surface truth for the true fan. That's you. That's why you come here. But then also making it as simple as possible for everybody to understand. All right, Vegas knows that Texas hasn't run the football well this season. 122nd ranked, explosive, in quotation marks, rushing offense. Okay, there's the first part. A one-dimensional football team on the road against a national championship contender that's dominated the sport for a decade. Recipe for a long evening, to say the least. Hence the 6.5-point line. All right, we got that part. Yet I can't help but consider how Georgia dominated defenses like Ole Miss, and the Rebels were still able to keep things close. Seriously though, if you really go back and rewatch that game, Ole Miss and Georgia, just watch the line of scrimmage get reset. Physically dominating bunch up front with NFL running backs, a truly legitimate I call it a dual threat rushing attack because their array of guys that they can run back there. It's really a 4-man rotation, but their top two, like I said, NFL caliber players. So if you go and rewatch that game and pay close attention to the line of scrimmage getting reset on almost every run rep, then you think about who Texas is stopping the run, one of the best in the country. You don't push around that front unless you're Florida, or in this instance, Texas, showing up to Florida unprepared for that grown man heavyweight fight that they apparently didn't know that they were in for, which they should have. Georgia has the ability to attack Texas in a very similar way, but this Texas team got their wake-up call then. That's not who they are now. Let's also just briefly mention real quick and acknowledge the passing defense that's been, let's just say, exploited. Gets 2 NFL safeties back this week. That's a factor here too. But let's continue. What's the ultimate point, right? Georgia won't bully the Texas defensive front to the tune of 220 rushing yards. And it's well within the range of outcomes that Texas forces Georgia into being a much more one-dimensional offense than they are comfortable being. Okay, that 220-yard rushing number isn't something that I just pulled out of thin air, by the way. That is the actual total, 221 to be exact, that Georgia rushed against Ole Miss. Yet somehow Ole Miss still kept it close. Why is that? Well, in its simplest form, okay, their edges, they don't have NFL edges. They're not creating pressure with 4 this year like they were last year. Jalen Walker and Mykel Williams aren't walking out that tunnel. They're having to manufacture pressures a lot more than they did a year ago. And they're paying the price as a result of it. They can't play as much man coverage as they want. They're big, long, physical corners. The body types that Kirby Smart is known for recruiting that are still on this roster today, they can't be quite as aggressive in your face at the line of scrimmage, disrupting timing and those things, because they're not generating pressure as quickly. So they're less suffocating, just as a in total. They're bottom third of the entire country in total FEI defense, but they're one of the worst in the SEC creating pressures and negative plays. Where Texas is one of the best. All right, so we're kind of painting the picture here for you. Hopefully that you understand the things that I'm saying and that I'm making sense and not just rambling. If their season-long trend of not generating four-man pressures continues, it's also worth mentioning it's well within the range of outcomes that Georgia turns it up a tick, right? Just for this game because of Kirby Smart's ability to manufacture bulletin board material for the relationship. Texas went 0-2 against Georgia last year, but then 2-0 against Georgia in the offseason on the recruiting trail. Justice Terry, not the least of which. Significant additions for the long term. So these two teams here, there's recruiting that's in play. We got National Signing Day, or at least the early period, coming soon. A lot of recruits going to be in-house watching this showdown. So you get the point, right? There's a wrestling match in a multitude of areas here. So let's just assume, though, that their inability to generate four-man pressures continues. Then this matchup here could quickly become a pass fest that actually give Texas the slight edge. Capital letters there, the word edge, pun intended. Because Texas, unlike Georgia, does have the ability to create significant, quick pressure with a four-man front. They do. But Georgia has neutralized elite pass rushers all year long. The ones that they have seen. They haven't seen a front like this, but just generally speaking, by getting the ball out quickly, similar to what the new and improved Texas offense does. We'll talk about that more in just a second. So it begs two very important questions. Who tackles better in space, and who has the better array of playmaking weaponry? And that's, once again, if this becomes a pass fest on both sides of the football. Okay? Each quarterback has a very low A-dot. That is, in the games that we are comparing Texas to, where we expect them, there's two significant game plans here that were polar opposites of who they had tried to be every other game this season. And one of those two games was against Oklahoma, and the other one was their most recent opponent 2 weeks ago prior to the bye week against Vanderbilt. And then also, of course, the final minutes of the fourth quarter, the 10 or so minutes of the fourth quarter against Mississippi State, where they had no other choice but to spread them out, get the ball out to their playmakers in space, and then Arch just having the ability to manipulate the pocket a little bit better than, let's say, Quinn would have last year, and then hit guys deep. So you get the point. The Texas offense that we know them to be now, that we expect to see on Saturday, very low A-dot. All right, as a matter of fact, nobody has more passing attempts in the entire conference behind the line of scrimmage. The top two guys in that regard, that statistic, Arch Manning and Gunnar Stockton. All right, so once again, I beg the question. Who tackles better in space? And who has the better array of playmaking weaponry? I don't know that I have a confident answer for either of those. So that's where you, the viewer, the listener here, come into play, and you can let me know in the comments what you think. You can help me expand upon this if you want to. I love hearing from you guys. It helps me think more outside the box than I feel like I already try to do. But then it also just helps me, for instance, come to a conclusion and maybe formulate a different opinion. And we'll talk about that too if that's the case. When it happens, we'll speak about it. Here's what I do know. Okay, because of each respective quarterback handling pressure from the pocket well and possessing plenty of mobility to extend plays and gash on the ground, we're not going to see a ton of man coverage in this game because you need eyes in the backfield, right? So I don't expect Georgia to copy and paste their approach last year, much more in your face like we talked about a minute ago. Because Quinn Ewers is much less mobile than Arch Manning is today. When you're in man coverage, oftentimes your DBs, they end up with their back turned to the quarterback, and that's how you can get gashed for explosive plays. If it's a four-man front, if you send pressure, usually more often than not when you're playing bump and run man coverage, you're sending pressure. Arch has evaded pressure at an elite level all season long because he's had to. That's one of his rare traits that the casual viewer, the stat sheet watcher, isn't going to necessarily pick up on. All right. Both quarterbacks are really good in this regard. And they understand where to deliver the football to their playmakers when pressure does come. They're not afraid to deliver in the face of it, but they navigate and evade it at a very elite level. Right? That's what we got. That's what we got to mention here. So softer zone coverage is what I'm expecting, which wouldn't be necessarily a deviation from either team's norm. I just mean Georgia will be much less willing, I would say, this year because of the two factors. It's really both factors that play into one. They don't have first round edges on both sides of the line of the tackle box this year, right? But on top of that, Texas doesn't have a stationary signal caller. Arch is far from that, and Gunnar Stockton is too. Okay, so once again, which team tackles better in space and who has the better array of playmaking weaponry? We will find out soon enough. That's where my head's at. In its simplest form, for this game, that's where I'm at. If Gunnar Stockton has to throw the football 40 plus times, or let's just say this, if Texas's defensive front isn't like that of Ole Miss, getting pushed around to the tune of 220 yards on the ground, what is he like if Texas is able to force negative plays? Tackles in space well. Gets into third and long situations where Ethan Burke, Lance Jackson, Colin Simmons, even Anthony Hill in certain situations. Bunch of NFL, potentially first round. Colin Simmons might be a top 5 overall pick. And when it's all said and done, he's still a year away. But the best edge room in the country. If Texas can force Georgia into a couple more of those third and longs that teams like Ole Miss weren't able to, because they couldn't stop the run when they absolutely had to. They couldn't force Gunnar Stockton into holding the football longer than he wants to. What happens if Texas forces Georgia into being a much more pass-heavy team than they are comfortable being? If this becomes a pass fest, does that favor Texas? The answer is yes, in my humble opinion. The second part of this, we're at 12 minutes and counting now. I want to make sure this is quick. And we'll get out of here before we play that audio that I teased at the beginning. The most significant unknown in this matchup is the Texas that we expect to see offensively on Saturday has only been that version of itself for 1 week. 8 real quarters of a similar approach, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and then the fourth quarter of Mississippi State. All right? But one week, one example of, and it's the Vandy week with Cole Hudson and Connor Robertson playing on the field at the same time. Cole at left guard, solving arguably the most gaping hole in the SEC, perhaps even abroad, the entire country, where Texas had a 18-year-old true freshman tackle starting at left guard because they were that desperate. And how it got to that point is a completely different discussion that we're going to have to spend a lot of time on. And heads will likely roll as a result of it. Somebody messed up. All right, but the ultimate point, we are here. We are where we are now, where our feet are. And our feet are pointed in the direction of Texas looking like the most competent offensive line version of itself. That's happened for 1 week. So that is still a relative but very significant unknown. Is Texas still only the 122nd ranked explosive rushing offense in the country if this version of their offensive line plus this version that we've seen for 1 week plus this version, right, of the offense that we've seen for 2 games and change, how much different are things for their offense as a whole? Are they more multidimensional than we currently view them? Okay? Does that most significant unknown also perhaps create the most significant advantage for either team on either side of the ball? Speaking, of course, in the direction and in favor of Texas's offense versus Georgia's defense that we know is susceptible to keeping offenses on the field. Because they aren't generating pressure at the rate that they did last year. Very few negative plays, very few sacks, very few pressures relative to their expectation. That's where my head's at. And I appreciate you for watching. This, of course, a production on behalf of Inside Texas, the leading insider for all things Texas football, or Texas sports, but especially Texas football. I'm Lando from The Lando Show with Sports Below the Surface. I hope that you'll do us a favor. Hit the like button for me. Help continue the growth of this platform. 85,000 strong and counting across all socials. We're trying to get to 10K before the end of this season. I know that we can do it with your help. Remember that prayer changes things, and the war is already won. Enjoy the game. I'll talk to you guys soon.
In this first half, this from 37.